All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another one of our TRC user groups. Today is going to be a little unique as far as the format. As you see, we've got some video going today, and typically we don't. It's usually a PowerPoint presentation. Today is going to be a little bit more of a Q&A, questions and answers, just kind of a open dialogue and conversation surrounding cybersecurity. And joining us today, our guest speakers are from Claroty. We have Gary Lieberitz and Daniel Lance from Claroty, and they'll be discussing some cybersecurity measures that we can take in the industrial space and kind of where to get started and where we're going as far as the landscape moving forward. What prompted this was a lot of what's going on in the news recently with the Colonial Pipeline hack, as well as the JBS Foods hack, and some other things that have happened recently in the news that have kind of brought this all to the forefront, because these are now prevalent in the OT space, and it's becoming a pretty provocative area that we need to get our hands on and start addressing our needs. So thank you for joining us. Please go ahead and submit any questions into the question comments. We have some panelists, our normal TRC panelists who present on these on the back end, monitoring that for us, so we can get some of those questions as well as the questions we already have kind of mapped out of where we're going with this conversation. So at that point, I will turn this over to Gary and Daniel. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Brandon. Good morning, everyone. Gary Lieberitz, I'm with Claroty and based in Houston, Texas, energy capital of the world. And Daniel's together with me. I'll be introducing both of us in just a moment, but we'll start off with just saying a word or two about Claroty. Claroty is a company that was established in order to assist in addressing the OT cybersecurity challenges, bridging the gap between IT and OT. The company is backed by industry leaders like Rockwell Automation, Siemens, Schneider Electric, and others. And customers of Claroty are in all of the 18 different identified market verticals within industrial, such as oil and gas, energy, utilities, water manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, companies like BHP Billiton, Pfizer, NNG, GM, AB InBev, China Light and Power, and so on and so forth. Before introducing Daniel, I will just say one or two things that I think is a good level ground for starting the conversation. Industrial cybersecurity has become a thing. It's a big thing as well. Anybody that took the 1 hour and 26 minutes to listen to the testimonial of these and published YouTube video of the CEO of Colonial getting asked a lot of questions by Congress is also there to attest and see that this is a big deal. This is something that is important and meaningful and can create damage and issues. But together with all that, the sky's not falling, the world is not coming to an end, and this is a manageable task that we have at hand. And the main objective of our conversation today, and the questions I'll be asking Daniel, and for him to share his knowledge and wealth of knowledge and experience with us, is to really get a good understanding of, yes, this is a serious matter. Yes, it can create a lot of bad things, but it's manageable. And if we all do the right activities, then we should be okay getting through yet another cybersecurity type of curveball thrown all at us. A little bit about Daniel Lance. So Daniel is an accomplished technical professional. His focus is on industrial control system security. He's currently working at Claroty as a solutions engineer. I would say a senior and accomplished solutions engineer. He served as a lead engineer to a commercial security integrator, where he's heavily involved in rapid development and deployment of electronic force protection systems. He has extensive experience in applied electronics, computer networking, and has a working knowledge of programming expertise with a keen interest in and understanding of applied physics. Daniel is a frequent speaker on the topic of industrial cybersecurity. And the fun fact about Daniel is Daniel has over 40 NVDs, which are National Vulnerability Database Indicators, accredited to him. I think that kind of gives a lot of credibility towards Daniel. And with that, without further ado, I'd like to jump into asking Daniel the first question. So based on these recent, JBS and Colonial and Oldsmar, et cetera, so based on these recent events in this OT cybersecurity world, what do you think these cybersecurity compromises have taught us from a threat landscape?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And I just want to start off by thanking the Reynolds Company for allowing us to speak today. Yeah, so they've taught us a lot. If you weren't really sure where we were at in the threat landscape as far as ransomware is concerned, I believe wholeheartedly today that we're actually at the top of the bell curve when it comes to ransomware and the effects and the distribution and the models that we're seeing. And we're even seeing on hacker forums such as XSS, where they're going out and starting competitions, which has kind of been a common thing, but they're starting competitions to create new attack vectors, new ways of plotting against corporations, industries, and adversaries. So we are seeing an evolution, and the benefit of knowing that you're at the top of the bell curve is only good if you know where the bottom of that bell curve is. So at the bottom of that bell curve in ransomware, unfortunately, it looks an awful lot like war, like common warfare, which if you didn't already know today when you jumped on this call, if you own industrial assets that have high value assets, you're likely at some form of war. You're engaged in that in some way. And of course, you're working at it from a defense perspective. Being at the top of the bell curve, the reason why I believe that is the case today is because only about 6 years ago, we saw the first massive distribution of a ransomware attack through an application called Transmission. That happened back in 2015, where that application was actually compromised in order to distribute ransomware on the Mac OS operating system. So we have seen an evolution and a progression into how ransomware attacks have been carried out, the sophistication of which, the availability of those tools, modification of those tools, widespread availability of them. One of the most clever things that you can do as an attacker is when you design these tools is actually give them out to a lot of people. That way, it becomes really hard to figure out who you are and track down where exactly the attack might be coming from. So we have seen that evolution. We're at the top of the bell curve. Now going towards the bottom of the bell curve, we're going to get a lot more scarier attacks, and I believe that we're going to see a massive transition in not only how people are attacked, how their assets and their information, their user data, which their data is going to be more valuable than gold. We've long thought that was the pinnacle of energy companies, is that eventually their data will be worth more than the electrons they sell. That's a famous quote from Patrick Miller, one of the founding members of a group that studies NERC and SIP. And but really, what we need to consider today is that we could be going into a scenario not unlike how post-modern warfare wound up fighting proxy wars. We could see that happening in cybersecurity, where attacking a target is not necessarily the target that you're trying to attack. You might be attacked as an asset owner because of the customers you keep, the neighbors that you keep, relations that you might have. And we've actually seen in the last 24 hours, actually a massive bombshell where one of the nuclear contractors, their name is Solarwinds. I had to write it down. It's kind of a funny name here, but they just got compromised by a group that we're well aware of from the JBS Foods hacks, and they're actually threatening to share or distribute data that they've exfiltrated as part of this compromise with adversaries of the United States. And so this really calls into question how this threat landscape is going to change and evolve. And simply holding your networks hostage may not be enough for attackers here in the future. The possibility of selling or distributing your data has long been something that has been talked about in hacking forums, has been something that ransoms have been built around. But I do feel that we're going to start seeing attacks, even micro attacks, where we're just taking down services for short periods of time to get different changes or different things in the market to happen that would allow an attacker to place bets on who might win or lose a contest or a contract, or even common warfare. So these things are evolving. We are at the top of the bell curve. There's a lot of visibility on this. A lot of asset owners are taking proactive steps. We've gotten a lot of calls, Gary and I, over the last few weeks. And that's what we want to talk about today is, how this is evolving and what we're seeing, and the scalability of defending these networks is in question. And that, if we get 5, 6, 12 of these phone calls in a week, hey, we have a project that we want to launch tomorrow, and we have 40 sites around the world or 300 sites domestically. How are we going to go about that? And how are we going to rise to that occasion? We've definitely, undergone a massive transition here at Claroty in the last year, as we've seen a ratcheting up in the sophistication of these attacks, kicking off the beginning of this decade with Solarwinds. And that's something that we could definitely dive into, because Solarwinds itself is a 900-pound gorilla that appears to have nothing to do with OT, but can actually teach us a heck of a lot about how we're going to see nation state activity evolve over time, and how that's going to influence kind of the underlings and private hacking groups that have been set up to exploit and create revenue from these things. But hopefully that was a bit of a long answer.
Really interesting though, Daniel, bringing up the very recent publicizing of the compromise of the contractors of nuclear facilities. The good news there is that it seems like the bad guys weren't able to break into the nuclear facilities, so they were looking for other routes in. The bad news is that they found something. Well, I don't know that they actually found something to get in, but they found something that they were able to gain or glean information about it. But once again, that just I think highlights the whole aspect of, you can't just protect what's within your own four walls. You absolutely need to take into account supply chain and contractors and anybody involved within your own environment. But let me ask you this question, because based on the compromises that we're seeing and based on what we're experiencing, it kind of seems like at times yet another hack happening. Are we getting any better as defenders, or is this a totally losing battle? And by the way, I will hint back to at the beginning when I said this is a manageable issue and the sky isn't falling, but still at times you kind of lose, all the air comes out with defending. So what words of wisdom do you have for us on that?
Yeah, well, I've been defending networks and assets for over a decade now, and in my experience, it's absolutely a winnable competition. We have a worthy adversary, which is how you always know you have a good contest. But at the end of the day, what you have to remember is defense is still easier than offense, right? It's easier to shut down something happening, to block something from happening than it is to allow it. A computer by nature will not do anything it's not allowed to do. It also won't do anything that you don't tell it to do. So they're not sporadic. We understand these fundamentals of technology, and defense today is still easier than offense. That said, we just brought up SolarWinds, of course, that compromise. Well, in regards to the SolarWinds, that's kind of like a Pearl Harbor-esque event that happened in cybersecurity. SolarWinds kind of took the cake on that one, but it was actually an attack that was propagated across multiple different companies. Certainly, Microsoft had some assets that were involved and targeted by those same groups. Really creative things were being done to hinder a defender from being able to recognize or understand their target. And I would say that that's actually probably one of the least useful things that we can do today as defenders, is put a lot of energy into target acquisition ourselves. It takes a lot of air out of the room, so to speak, to use your analogy. But I do believe as these things are moving on and progressing, we're getting new defenders. We're printing OT defenders at lightning speed. We're bringing in people from all different industries and walks of life, and we're teaching them how these systems need to be defended against. And I think there's a bright side to all of this, and certainly our solutions and solutions like ours that are being implemented at the lower level networks to understand, to be able to suck in all those network communications and be able to visualize them in a way that we can instantly jump on and respond to. That's all going to continue. We're going to see probably IDS, IPS protections really taking front and center, maybe even over common things like firewall. And we could even see technologically a mending of the two of those solutions, where if you say that you have firewall protections, or you say that you have intrusion prevention, which is actually going out and making changes to the firewall, like what Claroty is capable of doing, we're certainly going to see those become synonymous things with defense. And it really is the final frontier to this day of defense. But we understand the technology. We're printing more defenders, and defense today is still easier than offense. But you are at war, and you have a worthy adversary that's been training likely for many years, even decades, and they know a lot. They know a lot about how to execute against you, and they've been studying you, unfortunately. Yeah, hopefully that personifies that.
Oh, for sure. And by the way, low hanging fruit is what they're always looking for, the easy way in, obviously. I can tell you out of personal experience with very many installations, hundreds in the number over the last few years, industrial environments, a very common theme that we ran into was, as we'd install and we'd start running the system, we'd get alerts saying that there is a component in the system that's doing unhealthy behavior, port scans and the likes. And then we'd have the customer take a look and check and see, oh, that's Solarwinds, that's okay. You need to go ahead and put a rule in your system to enable Solarwinds to do what it does, because that's cool, that's good. And I think that, one of the lessons learned there is that the whole concept of zero trust, or of you do not trust a component. Everything and everyone and every process is suspect, because anytime that you do give a process or a component or whatever within the system any level of discounts, well, the bad guys are going to learn that also, and obviously that's where they're going to try to hijack the system. So getting,
let me stop you right there real quick, because that's actually where we're seeing a lot of interest in our solutions for IoT applications, of course. But also a little bit in the IT arena as well, where, to really adopt a zero trust model that also includes having tools that go out and actively interrogate assets on your network. That's the first thing that I'm going to do as an attacker when I get in your network, is I'm going to go out and enumerate assets. And in case anybody on the call doesn't already know this, it's not as simple as just gaining access to the network or getting a RAD, or remote access tool on your network. You actually have to go and tip over multiple boxes in the network in order to distribute your ransomware. And sometimes there's 0 days and things like that that might be automated into this, but really 0 days are really too valuable for that type of thing. And when you have a customer that has a legacy VPN, for example, you have constant access, and we're seeing dwell times in networks in excess of 8 months. That's a figure that SANS has put out there a few times, where in IT it's much shorter. However, being able to suck all of that information in passively without needing to harass or interrogate any devices on the network, and also being able to see all their transactions and create baselines and create an understanding of what's happening in your environment passively is really the way forward. We're getting just an enormous amount of interest surrounding that.
So taking this one step further, I've heard the statement of, but it won't happen to us. It won't happen to me. I've heard that time and time again. So Daniel, can you take us a little bit more into the details of what we know about Colonial Pipeline? Because Colonial is one that came out in the public. Oldsmar did the same, and others that came out and publicized what happened to them. I know firsthand that we're still tip of the iceberg. Most of the compromises that happen are not publicized yet. And I think that we're getting into a stage where an increasing number will. But at this point, actually, the majority don't go public. But Colonial did. So what do we know, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting with in regards to Colonial going public. Well, we know a lot. We know too much, in fact, and that kind of becomes an issue when you're actively working on an investigation, trying to recover a network, having the media swarming your facilities, releasing maybe potentially inaccurate details that make your responders or defenders seem incompetent in the eyes of those that know better. That can be also detrimental. Of course, we know about this in warfare going back into the 90s, where there was just an unprecedented level of news coverage around some activities of boots on the grounds, where the attackers, in that case in common warfare, could turn on the news station and figure out where assets were. Well, we don't want the same thing to happen to our cyberspace.
Right.
And we certainly don't want proceedings and negotiations about ransomware payments and things of that nature to be in the public eye. Of course, Colonial was kind of curious that they have admitted they went out and paid the ransom almost immediately. I think part of the reason for going public in their case was they weren't going to be able to hide it for very long, that pipeline, that major asset, was down. And what we've learned, I intentionally stayed away from a lot of the news sources, knowing that there was a lot of good people on the ground that were working on this, including some people that I've worked with for a very long time were on the ground. I intentionally didn't ask them anything, but listening to what the CEO has said and the proceedings that were kicked off in that deposition. The chairman actually kicked off the deposition. If you haven't reviewed it, please go review it. It is a great deposition, and the chairman actually kicked off the conversation by saying, "No CEO in America envies the position you're in right now," and there's probably never anything more accurate to have been said about a cybersecurity incident. And what we saw, there was multiple members of Senate come forward with really good questions, surprisingly good questions. And one of the things that was brought up, of course, was the ransomware payment. How did you make the decision to pay the ransom? Did somebody tell you to pay the ransom? Things of that nature. All really valid questions that I think we still want to dig into quite a bit more. Of course, Colonial was engaged with the FBI Center of Excellence. They were engaged with Department of Homeland Security as well. And they really distributed that tool that we have in place is functioning extremely well, and that they had a single point of contact that they could call and utilize all of the resources of the United States government and all of our great defenders to help them recover. That's all perfect. What's questionable though is you pay a $6 million ransom, and you have the CEO kind of sitting there going, hey, I don't know who exactly told us to do this, and we paid the money. It's not every day that you go to your accounting and ask for $6 million to pay a terrorist. so I have a feeling that somewhere we're going to find out where exactly that decision came down from. More importantly, though, is what happened afterwards. Of course, it was very viable for the investigation that the FBI was conducting to try to figure out where the attackers were, physical location, who they were. Again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times the best thing that you can do is go out and share your code everywhere you can. DarkSide has been bookmarked or attributed to a Russian hacking group. I don't know that that's accurate today. I don't know that there's been great attribution that's been done today, but what's really curious about it was that we of course saw funds being intercepted, which only happens a handful of ways. If you're not familiar with some of these things, feel free to give us a call, contact us afterwards, and we'll kind of run you through what these things look like in a post exploit world, which a lot of times we'll get called to put in our solution after a compromise to help them figure out where to go and how to defend. But what's curious is the Bitcoins, a portion of the Bitcoins were actually seized, which appeared to be affiliate payments that DarkSide was making to people that had worked with them and helped them in this exploit. The reason that's notable is that only happens on the coin market if you have a hot wallet or you somehow have the private keys to one of those affiliates, and of course
Somehow.
it wouldn't. Somehow, yeah, it wouldn't be unfathomable to think that DarkSide had been previously penetrated, and that some of their financials might have already been understood. Shortly after that, we did see some activity on the Sfx Hacking Form, which the Sfx Hacking Form for DarkSide, there's an area of that form that actually works as an arbiter where they actually have a plaintiff, and they have full legal proceedings. And this is why it's kind of curious that everyone kind of believes that this group is Russian linked, because they're actually using the United States legal code in many cases to bring up what charges they have against people. And so we saw in the Sfx Hacking Form members that were affiliates of DarkSide coming out with charges against DarkSide for lack of payment, which suggests that some of these members were never paid as affiliates, which means that even if they were doing something called coin stacking, and that's where you go out to the exchange and you fractionalize your Bitcoins and swap them around a bunch of times to try to mix up where that payment had come from, because the blockchain is of course extremely auditable. And it's actually trivial for a computer usually to figure out where those payments ended at. They really need to exit blockchain in order to become valuable, because they're just so highly trackable. But in this form, it was alleged that a lot of their affiliates were never paid, in fact. So it's it is questionable as to whether or not DarkSide themselves could have been compromised, or whether they were using all of the PR that was generated as a result of how provocative Colonial was to be taken offline. If they utilized that PR to actually create kind of a false narrative around the idea that they had been defunct as a group and would then be closing up, which would allow them to potentially not pay 15-20% of the collected ransoms. So that's those are all probabilities. So what we know today, they were compromised from a legacy VPN. So the CEO came out and said that, hey, we had a legacy VPN. And he said that the defenders that they had on site there from some notable companies indicated that, hey, that wasn't unusual, and that's absolutely correct. It's not unusual to have some of these legacy VPNs laying around, and sometimes it's not so easy to upgrade and improve those services on our networks. That's certainly why we went out and created a product called SRA, Secure Remote Access, specifically designed for OT assets. And let us know if you would like a brief on that. But what SRA is attempting to do there is really alleviate what an attacker can do post exploit of that VPN, not just in a 2FA sense, because we have multiple examples of 2FAs being able to be broken and challenged quite severely, but actually being able to create controls such as a firewall that would completely prevent you from being able to do anything once you had access. So legacy VPN, you probably have some in your organization. Maybe you do or don't know about it. That's where IPS, IDS detection, having a network level understanding of all the sessions that are flowing through your network as a defender is going to be paramount. Your attacker today has stealth, right? Your attacker is flying around in an F-35 fighter with nuclear capabilities sometimes, unfortunately. And they're able to execute that stealth just because there is no way to interrogate what they're doing without IPS or IDS detection. So that's definitely why I see passive detection being the way forward, where going out and actively interrogating these devices, while valuable from a defense and risk quantifying standpoint, being able to actually stop an attack once it's happened, and it will happen. Being able to stop or limit that attack and isolate it is really the value that you're looking for today. Aside from just being able to see it or being able to run incident response post exploit.
Great response, and appreciate you sharing so much more information about the Colonial Pipeline. One of the questions in the chat that came up is, with the latest attacks, was there any way of defending, or to the best of our knowledge, were the attackers smarter than current defender solutions? And I'll jump in first and give some thoughts about that, and then Daniel, let you add on to that. So the mass majority of compromises that weren't state-sponsored were those that compromised known vulnerabilities. And I think that a lot of organizations have a lot of work that they need to do to deal with vulnerabilities at the same degree and level and intensity that they deal with threats. So for example, if it becomes known that there's a compromised asset, a server, an endpoint has malware on it or whatever, the IR team and every organization pretty much jumps in, and everybody's, all hands on deck and so on. I don't see that in the industry in general, that level of intensity from a vulnerability perspective. And the beauty of vulnerability and dealing with vulnerabilities is there are known areas where your pants are down in advance. You've got an opportunity to deal with it before it becomes an issue. So the legacy VPN at Colonial is one example. A TeamViewer not correctly configured at Oldsmar is another example, and so on and so forth. So these are all, every organization typically will have a lot of, when we install, I know many times we'll see, oops, we just found out that in an isolated, air-gapped industrial facility or plant, somebody installed an HP printer that comes by default with a default user ID that anybody can Google and find, and Wi-Fi open. Well, it's no longer an air-gapped environment, and it can be running that way for a long time. That's a known vulnerability as an example. So it's really important, I believe, that organizations elevate and escalate up how serious they take known vulnerabilities so that they avoid the compromises later on, because mostly they're pretty simple. So to answer specifically the question on whether the attackers are smarter than the defender's solutions, I think that in the most part, the answer to that question is no, but the attackers are smart enough to know that a lot of organizations are not taking vulnerability or prepare themselves against being attacked by known vulnerabilities, and that's where so many of the compromises happen.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was discovered recently that definitely impacts IoT devices, industrial IoT devices as well, is as frag attacks on Wi-Fi. And that's something that a lot of radio vendors will not have patches for, even after all of the code is made available, or if it's already been reverse engineered how frag attacks work. And this is where you're basically flooding Wi-Fi adapters with fragmented packets that eventually allows you to do injection from outside the gate. And these can even be discovered and exploited on hidden networks and things of that nature. None of that really stands to reason that you have a good defense just because you've hidden your SSID. So yeah, to expand on that, we're certainly going to see attackers utilizing commonly known vulnerabilities that are potentially a decade old for the foreseeable future. And I think we're actually getting to a post 0-day world where the 0-day itself used to, certainly on forums like SSX, we used to see people selling 0-day attacks. Even some of the 0 days that I've revealed in the past, I've seen sold online, weaponized for $10,000, I believe, per exploit. And those were all industrial food exploits. But food equipment, I should say. So we used to see a lot of focus on that. Now we're actually seeing a lot of focus on the tools that you use post exploit. And I think in the future we're actually going to see this marketplace of ideas really expanding inside of forums like SSX, which by the way is not low hanging fruit in these forums. These are heavy hitters from all over the world. These forums take I think somewhere in the ballpark of 3 to 4 Bitcoin in order to join. So that can be, depending on what day it is, $150,000 to, $400,000, depending on where Bitcoin's at. But it actually costs money to join these forums, and they hold some of that money in escrow. Sometimes you can have contracts, and a lot of these private hacking groups will have their own ledger system. And inside of that ledger system, they'll have accreditations for who brought what to the table and what percentage of the keep, if you use certain tools, they get. So we're seeing some really sophisticated and unfortunately for good or bad, we're seeing a lot of Western ideas around governance and management of these systems that are being utilized. I think which stands to reason that we have the best fighting chance when your attackers, which potentially might be from communist countries or other places like that, are actually using a system of governments that they feel is more effective for international business. And undoubtedly the United States is the repo of the world. We can't just disconnect. We have to figure out how to defend these things. We have to continue to allow these investments and automations to grow in value, and we have to get comfortable with something that the CEO from Colonial Pipeline said, where he came out and essentially said, hey, everybody that really knew how to run this thing in manual mode before, guess what? They've all retired. They're not here anymore. We know how to start it. We know how to stop it. We understand the asset, but they did not have good enough visibility into what their risks were at the time of compromise to know that they could keep the pipeline running. So a little caveat there, the only reason the pipeline shut down was because they shut it down. They said that this asset is too valuable. We don't have good segmentation. We don't know the extent of the attack. And so they actually flipped the switch themselves to protect the asset. And we might see more of that happening in infrastructure. This is where it's really important to understand your adversary is studying you. Your public response and what you do post-exploit that they can sense, that they can get a feel for. They're going to be studying that. They're going to be making notes of that. Gary, actually, you and I were talking the other day about some things that were happening in energy a little over a decade ago, where we had people that were popping in manhole covers and walking down sewer lines and jumping into substations. Those are kind of the routing centers for our electric grid. And in those substations, they were taking out the substations, cutting fiber, taking out 911 services and things of that nature. And then what they were doing is going across town, not even in the same location, going across town and taking rifles and shooting transformers. And this was clearly to figure out what our response would be and what the timeline was for people like the local government to get involved, to escalate to the FBI, to escalate and figure out what other intelligence we might have had about these people, who they were, what their motives were. But all of that was a study, and to figure out, what would be released and what FARVA request might be done thereafter that might give them some insight as to what our inner thinking is whenever these things happen. And that's why I truly believe that the more valuable frontier for a lot of these groups, a lot of these hacking groups, is really going to be creating proxies where you might be attacked, you might suffer an attack based solely on the value of your asset in relation to other people. Right now, we have a huge silica shortage. There's a great facility out on the West Coast. I won't say exactly who it is, but they only have a handful of power stations going into them. That might be a good way of attacking that particular company. So you have to think about, you have the New York Stock Exchange, you have places like that might be obvious to try to take offline. But it might actually be more advantageous to take down a major silica manufacturer, or even a battery manufacturer, or even the chemical plant that does the processing for the battery. That way, it doesn't appear on the surface like a major EV company was compromised. It's simply their vendor. It's the supply chain. And I do believe that we're going to see a lot more of that happening, both in a linear fashion and a horizontal and vertical integrated fashion, where you're really going to have to start connecting the lines to figure out how to respond, what you want to tell the media, and if you haven't already considered how you're protecting the evolution that's already happening in your OT and in your automation environment, then please call us. that's one thing. But if you haven't already considered that, start considering that today, and where Industry 4.0 and how your reliance on things like cloud and transitioning to cloud, not only with your OT tools, your IT tools as well, and how that affects the process, the core thing that you produce, whether that be tennis shoes, a pipeline, rockets, missile systems, all of that good stuff. You really want to consider what the value of your assets might mean to your neighbor.
So Daniel, questions are coming in. So I'm going to actually take two of them and trying to combine them. I'll give a little bit of my thought up front, but the first question here is how to detect if my asset is compromised, attacked. My simplistic response to that, and then I'm going to tie in the next question, but my simplistic response to that is make sure you have monitoring in place. I mean, the mass majority of industrial environments today, surprisingly so, do not have monitoring going on. They don't even know what assets they have within the environment. I mean, it's just blocking, tackling, starting off with, you got to know what you have in order to be able to protect it. So from an asset inventory perspective, and then real-time threat monitoring has to be in place, which once again, it's getting better than it was a number of years ago, but still the majority of industrial environments today do not have any monitoring going on. But hold that question for a moment, because the next one I think really ties in very well of how do you respond to this type of a scenario when we're specifically talking about industrial environments. And I love this question. So the big problem for me is not the new system. It's the old system that we're set and forget. There were not software measures, antivirus, anti-malware, active monitoring, whitelisting, etc., or hardware, network segmentation, VPN, firewall, etc. How can you make those systems safe without redesigning or replacing the entire system? That's a cool curveball there to the question.
Yeah, I think this really plays into post exploit. You have a system you've maybe failed to keep the moat in place, and somebody's been able to jump over the wall. So now what? You have maybe a compromised HMI or otherwise. I think this really harkens back to what we saw happen in IT, and particularly with incident response, and where we saw usually exfiltration of data being ransomed against people. Certainly, there were some more notable cases that actually led to some people taking their own lives. There was a really well-known adulterous site that was compromised at some point. Taking this back to the OT world, where we're going to see that evolution happen is we're going to see a lot more microservices into OT. we're going to see a lot more tactics around thin clients and data recovery, where you get compromised, and we need to recover just a small section of the network that we've quarantined. And solutions like ours can tell you all the asset neighbors, who they're talking to, what their regular baselines are, so you can go out and do baseline remediation on all those assets, recover from your backups only what you need to, instead of the idea that you're going to be compromised, wait for something to happen, and hopefully the backups are all good, and then we're going to go out and reload backups on 30 sites using decades old technology, where the engineers that first programmed it have been retired for a long time. We're working on, and we're dealing with technology that was designed to go to the moon in most cases. You look at the genesis of Rockwell Automation. They were designing these systems for defense. They were designing them for space exploration, and a lot of the commercialization of PLC automation hardware was really born from a lot of those tactics. And the protocols to be able to network these in a distributed system were mostly implemented, in the 80s and 90s, and not a whole lot has changed since. And in the modernization, again, going back to that Industry 4.0 and where we see a lot of customers going, you're going to have to rely on more sophisticated approaches to run your business, to stay competitive, to make your products at a price point that's desirable for the customer. We can't stop innovation and automation. It's going to continue to progress. But what we can do is we can better quantify our risks. We can understand our compromises, because there will be compromises. You can run my solution, you can run anybody else's solution as well. You're likely going to still see a compromise that we have never seen before, that we can have visibility into. We can understand where it's at in the network. We can quarantine it. We can put wrappers around it. Again, a computer won't do anything you don't tell it to. So we can figure this out, but it's going to require a much more aggressive approach to industrial cybersecurity. And I'm definitely happy to say today, I'm seeing that being ratcheted up. We're getting the right questions from our executives. We're getting a lot of questions we can't answer. And that's a problem. That's a problem that we try to solve every day at Claroty. Certainly in our insights, being able to tell you your top risky assets at a per asset level based on its configuration. We created something called a cloud reputation, where we're actually autonomizing records on platform, totally optional, autonomizing records on platform and sending those up to a central cloud, where any one of our huge customers, and these are all public knowledge because they're also investors in our company. You have GM and BMW. They might have some sophisticated automation equipment that has a unique configuration that maybe you and them are the only people in the world that share that unique configuration. And we can actually let you know how risky or how rare or how unusual that particular baseline configuration is in a visual sense. You can actually see it. And that's something that has never been done before, never been seen before. I would venture that we're probably 5+ years ahead of the market in our thinking around how we view reputation of OT assets. Not unlike what happened with Styx indicators and things of that nature in the IT world, where reputation started to really mean something, and that evolved from a very trivial thing into TTPs, where we're tracking tactics, techniques, and procedures. But of course, what we'll learn in the coming decade from the Solarwinds attack was that the attackers in that case had really expertly studied what was publicly available about TTPs from another adversary. Right. And only recently, due to SecureWorks EDR and a data exfiltration that was executed utilizing the Supernova, which had not previously been uploaded to any known sources, they actually inadvertently in that data exfiltration had downloaded a agent from a SIM tool, an EDR tool. And when they opened that agent to inspect it, went out to the internet and pinged its cloud address, which revealed that the IP address was actually coming from China. Now, do I think that that has anything to do with China? No, not necessarily. Not at face value. Only because it would be extremely convenient of an adversary that had studied another adversary extremely well to also leave them with the bag. One tip personally that I want you to take away from today is go ahead on your computer and enable both the Chinese keyboard and the Russian keyboard, uh, just for fun. Because of course what we saw with some of these attacks is they have been checking the language settings on some of the devices, and I do believe that's a red herring. However, it is built into the code to actually stop the attack, to stop the remote access tool, and otherwise if you have those settings enabled. So you might want to just go ahead and enable those, but but outside of that, yeah, I think that's all I have on that.
It's amazing, but it's true, by the way. That's
Yeah.
a very actionable thing to do, to turn on Russian and Chinese on your input. By the way, a lot of good questions are coming in, but I just want to take this last question about the old equipment and just put a real quick spin on it. That's the reason why. I mean, when you talk about old equipment that was not designed with security in mind, because when they were designed, security, it wasn't an issue because all of these environments were just computerized systems for optimization, automation, totally isolated from anything else, not connected. That's exactly the reason why you need to consider looking at purposely built cybersecurity defense systems like Claroty for dealing with these environments, because that's what they take advantage of, and that's what they're designed to deal with, as opposed to IT business network cybersecurity solutions that do not know how to deal with these types of things because they're not common within the IT business network world. Let me jump over. There's really a lot of good questions I'd like to get to. I know that we're starting to run out of time, but let me jump over into some specific question and answer type of thing. So for VPN access, are certificate-based authentication methods better, worse, or just as secure as 2FA?
Yeah, I mean, just about as secure as 2FA. 2FA is really predicated on the idea that your attacker doesn't know your secret. So something you have, something you know. 2FA is the something you have of that. Something you know would be like your password. I would say removing the something you have, something you know might perceivably be less secure. If you're having this debate, you're already doing better than 95% of the world. Okay, so just please carry on.
That's a good response. And next point question: while port knocking is not a solution in itself, do you feel it can be helpful either internally or externally to help protect the network from intrusion?
So you mean not allowing port knocking? I might need some clarification on that. Port knocking as a solution. I mean, so I believe what this person is referring to is the ability to knock on and either wake up or see if a port responds. There's certainly a lot of tools out there to help you discover whether or not you have ports on your network, external servers that will actually try to come in and hit a whole range of the top 1,000 ports. So this is something that, you know, in cloud security, they've done a marvelous job of working around and blocking the lower 1,000 ports. That way, most standard attacks that utilize those lower 1,000 ports will be ineffective against those microservices, in addition to having web application firewalls and things like that that can do preemptive patching. Anytime there's a new CVE that comes out, they already kind of have a digital patch in place that doesn't allow the activity that would allow you to exploit that CVE. But yeah, so I probably just need more clarification on what that question is exactly.
The next question here, it's a very long one, and I'll try to summarize it because I think it's one that does concern and is top of mind for a lot of folks. So a lot of the people on the line, operators and so on, they subscribe to ICS Cert. And there's a bunch of CVEs that are published from ICS Cert. So number one is it's critically important to test any patch in a test environment before you roll it out. But just like so many other operators, this one, the person that asked this question said, I do not have the luxury of my own industrial system test environment to test the patches. And number two is, you need, within an industrial environment, you can't just patch systems. You need to wait for a maintenance window, or if there is a situation where it's extremely high importance, then maybe as an industrial cybersecurity expert, you need to go to the business and say, hey guys, we need to have an unplanned maintenance window so we can patch patches, that because it's such a vulnerable or high priority vulnerability. So the question here is more of the, how do you make decisions and considerations when you have situations like that? I'll first jump out, Daniel, with just saying, number one is you need to have expert systems in place that tell you and assist you in prioritizing vulnerabilities and what it really means to you. And those types of systems exist, such as ours. But in addition to that, you need to take into account, you will likely not be able to patch anywhere near as frequent as you would in the IT business network. I'm stating a type of a statement, but there are organizations that are very secure, even though they only patch once every 6 months or a year. But how do they do that? That's the question.
Yeah. Well, you need a test environment, without a doubt. You need some level of a test environment, or you need to go out and figure out who else is in the arena doing something similar to you and invest in a test environment together to lower the cost of the organization. Again, these are going to require very innovative business approaches to solve these problems. Truly, though, the key of OT is availability, keeping everything online, functioning. I'm aware of a scenario where there's a smelter in North America right now, where both PLCs were subject to the same malware, and the smelters, in case any of you don't know, they can't turn off. Those are the kilns where they melt the metal in order to create the steel and products that we use every day. And they're not going to be able to turn them off for another 20 plus years. So so those smelters are going to be running compromised. And we end up in scenarios like that, not only for lack of planning or consideration, but we don't want to additionally introduce reliability issues in trying to create a more secure environment. And sometimes running a asset with vulnerabilities may be the best approach. And that's where, again, we can help facilitate that by having visibility into what's going on with that asset. I want to respond to this one real quick. Looks like you got back to me on the port knocking. Port knocking meaning requiring port knocks from a client on a closed port to temporarily open a port. Yeah, I have seen that. Definitely much more of a IT-esque application is going to be capable of doing that, where you're going to see retransmits and failures or bounce backs. Definitely something you do. Not every PLC is going to respond super well to that disruption and communication, depending on what protocol it is. It may create a disrupted service to implement that on any kind of hardened device. Definitely one of the things that you could instantly do on IoT networks in particular, and what we've been recommending a bit lately is dropping any kind of port scans or ping sweeps at the firewall, and then being able to visualize that with a tool like Claroty to see to see all the transactions, to be able to see the assets. A lot of times, and I've been someone that's deployed these systems. A lot of times they come in, you don't know the IP address of that camera or that, a PLC. And of course you just do a ping sweep on the network and everything's good. Well, that can also look like adversary activity as well. And so we want to keep that to an absolute minimum. And it would be good on you to create a work procedure for if you need to run port scans, if you need to do that type of work on the network, to make it intentional and make sure that you have something in place that is either preventing that from being done otherwise for asset enumeration. Yeah, so getting into the heart of his question, that would be a good thing to do, to only allow the ports open whenever they need access, but not every application is going to respond well to that. That's why you need a lab. You need to be able to test out your hardening of these devices. Certainly, working with any number of good ICS cybersecurity partners would be a first step in getting you in the right direction, especially whenever it comes to hardening. You definitely want to talk to some people that have already been down that road, maybe even with that application, and that's going to accelerate your ability to defend the network.
Well, thank you, Daniel. We have more questions, and what I ask is the organizers from the Reynolds Company, if you can all just make sure that these questions are all copied and shared with us, then we'll make sure to get back with the responses. The last topic, and I know that from a time perspective, we're kind of there, but the last topic is, where do you start from addressing this? And what I'd say is a very short response. The Reynolds Company with Rockwell Automation and Claroty all team together. We've got the whole bucket of what would be required in order to assist you all. There is no single answer or silver bullet that would address everyone. And therefore, it's important to get a conversation going. We strongly encourage any of you that have not started this journey yet, or have started it but need some assistance and guidance and help. We've got tons of experience, and all the way through from the initial conversations of just getting an understanding where you are right now, current state, assisting, working together based on assessments of vulnerability testing, and coming up with a desired state together, building that gap analysis and remediation plan, as well as the technologies that would need to go along with that in order to be able to provide the level of solution that would be adequate for each organization based on where they're starting and where they need to get to. With all that, I'd really like to thank everyone here for participating. Daniel, as always, it was a huge, tremendous pleasure and honor to be together with you on the panel, and back to the Reynolds Company.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you everyone for joining. Please be on the lookout for more TRC Tech Talks and users groups. Until next time, thank you.